In this video, I'm going to show you the most important keyboard shortcuts and settings for brushes in Photoshop. First of all, press B for the brush tool. And once you have that, you will see the circle around your brush, which is the size of your brush. This is something that you can hide easily by pressing caps lock, which will switch to a precise mode where you only see a little crosshair. If you press caps lock again, it will switch back to the normal view of seeing the boundaries of your brush. And this is something you can change in the settings. If you go to Photoshop, Preferences, and choose Cursors, that's where you can find all these options. So first of all, we have the Painting Cursors and Other Cursors. Obviously, for the brush tool, we need to work with these options here on the left. You can see there's a very useful option called Show Only Crosshair while painting, which means whenever I'm actually painting, then it will automatically switch to that precise mode where I only see the crosshair, to make sure that I'm not distracted by the outlines. So let me show you how it looks. So I see the normal brush when I'm not painting, but as soon as I start painting, that disappears and I can paint only with the crosshair in the middle. That's a very useful option, especially when you use big brushes like this one. To switch between brush presets, you can press full stop or comma. These two can be used to go forward and backward between your brushes. So I can switch between these smoke brushes easily by using those keyboard shortcuts. So just to make sure you understand how it works, whatever brushes you load into the presets, which you can check from Edit, Presets, Preset Manager. Here you can see all the brushes I have in my preset manager. So between these I can easily switch by using the full stop and comma. And then a very important feature to change the size and the hardness of the brush, you can hold down Control and Alt together and then click and drag over the screen to the left or to the right. That will change the size of your brush, and dragging up and down will change the hardness of the brush. So let me just show it again. Dragging up or down changes the hardness. So Control and Alt holding down together and then click and drag. To change the opacity of your brush, you can press the numbers on the keyboard. For example, 6 to switch to 60%, or if you can press 0 to switch back to 100%. Like 1 would be 10%. And if you want to go to, let's say, 25, you just press 2 and 5 quickly after each other. The same way you can change the percentage of the flow property, but you have to hold down Shift for that. So Shift 5 would be flow set to 50%. And after that is the same as changing the opacity. I'm going to talk more about these basic controls like opacity and flow in another video, but for now I would like to also tell you another very useful option. To change the colors of your brush, you can hold down Control, Alt and Command, or Control, Alt, Shift on PC and then click, and that will give you the hot color picker option. This is called a heads up display, which again you can set up the way it looks like. At the moment it looks like this for me, but if I go back to the settings, in this case I need to go to General, and here under the hot color picker I can choose what type of hot color picker I would like to see. So I can use, for example, Hue Wheel. If I set it to that and then I use the same keyboard shortcut, then it will look like this. So it's a quite useful option, much faster way to change between colors than using the foreground color swatch here in the toolbar. Let me show you the basic controls for the brush tool in this video. We already talked about the hardness and the size and how you can control these two options with keyboard shortcuts. But after these, there's the opacity, the flow, and the pressure assigned to these. Plus there is also the blend modes options for the brushes. Now, I already said that you can use the numbers on your keyboard to change the opacity and the flow, but you can also click on these words here in the control bar or options bar and click and drag left and right to change these values. That's also a fast way to change them. But let's see what they do. If I have both of them on 100%, then my brushstroke will look like this. What happens if I change opacity to 10? So I'm going to press 1, that changes opacity to 10%, and then I draw a brushstroke and it's much more faded, less visible than the one on the left. And no matter how many times I go over it, it will still look the same. Only when I let go the brush and click again to draw over it, then it will add another 10%. Once again, if I click and add more, that's another 10%, and I can continue doing this. And as you can see, that was 10% here on the top, then 20, 30, 40, and it can build up. But I have to always let go the brush and start a new brush stroke. While if I reduce the flow and keep opacity on the top, and that will be the opposite. So I'm going to set flow to 10% by Shift 1. Now I press 0 to set opacity back to 100%. Now if I draw a brush stroke and I draw over it with the same brush stroke without letting it go, this can build up and create an effect like this. So the flow works like an airbrush. It lets the whole color build up eventually after a while if you keep it on and start drawing. What are these icons then? There is an icon here which looks like an airbrush, and that is exactly what it does. It enables the airbrush style build up effects. So if I turn this on and I have a flow set to 10%, for example, then I don't even have to move my brush to have this build up effect. So if I don't have that airbrush control on, I have to move the brush to get some paint coming out from it. If I have this on as well, then I just simply have to click, and as you can see, it slowly adds more and more color to the paper. Once again, I click and it slowly adds more and more. So if I click and drag, the more I stay in one place, the more paint will end up being there. So that's the airbrush control. Let me just turn that off and let me set back the flow to 100% by pressing Shift 0. I'm going to clear this layer by pressing Command A and then Backspace and then Command D. So Command A to select everything on the layer, press Backspace to delete that, and Command D to deselect your selection. Now, I'm going to change my brush hardness to 100%, make it a little bit smaller. Let's just see how it looks. So this is how it looks when I don't have any pressure control set up. And because I'm using a Wacom tablet, I have pressure sensitivity on it. So I'm going to turn on this option, which will let me use the pressure to control the size of the brush. Now, if I draw, you can see, yes, I can control it now. So if I add more pressure to it, then it changes the size. What if I turn this off and turn on the other option, which will control the opacity with the pressure? So if I turn that on, then I can change the pressure and then it will change the opacity. Looks also interesting. But what if I turn both of these on? Then I will be able to change the size and the opacity of my brush by changing the pressure on the tablet. And last but not least, I would like to show you how to change the blend mode of your brush. You can choose it from this list here on the control bar, but you can also use keyboard shortcuts. Let me just select multiply for now, and I'm going to turn off these controls. And if I draw once, that looks like this. It uses the same color. But if I draw again, now while they are overlapping each other, it will build up and get darker. So multiply eventually will end up being black. If I draw enough times over this part, it will become black. For example, if I use screen, then I can draw over a part and it will get brighter. So the more I draw over it, eventually it will get white in the middle. So this is also sort of a build-up effect that you can set up and by choosing a blend mode. But you can also change these blend modes with a keyboard shortcut. It's Alt Shift and then, for example, M for multiply, N for normal, S for screen. And you can also toggle between them. If you are not sure what you are looking for, but you just want to change the blend mode, you can use Alt Shift and then plus and minus. And as you can see there on the options bar, I'm going through all the available blend modes for my brush. Now that we've talked about the basic controls for the brush tool, we can have a look at the brush panel, because there we have lots of more options available. I can click on this icon here in the options bar, or I can also find the brush panel icon here on the right. So once you are in the brush panel, you will have lots of options here. And first of all, you can select brush tip shape. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So here in the brush tip shape, we have the brush presets. So these are defining the tip shape, but then we can also change the size and hardness, which we already talked about. Then you also have an option, this icon here, with which you can change the angle and the roundness of your brush. So you can change the angle like this and the roundness like this. So you can create, for example, a calligraphic brush. I can draw like that. It's a quite interesting way of setting up a brush. You can do quite a lot of things with this, and by just simply using these features here. I can also use the flip X and Y if I want to rotate a brush. So for example, if I have a brush which has a shape, a distinct shape, let's just say this triangle, I can press flip X, which in this case, because it's symmetrical, we won't see much difference, but flip Y will definitely make a difference on it. Let me choose another brush where we will see more changes. So for example, let me just select one of these. Yeah, so if I make my brush bigger, you can see how it looks, and I can press flip X, then it turns around, flip Y, and it turns like this, and I can flip only Y, and then we have the brush like that. So flip X and Y is also useful, but what's most useful out of these options here in the brush tip shape controls is the spacing. Now what happens if I draw with spacing set to the default 25%? You can see that on the edges we will have these little bumps. The reason because it happens is because Photoshop is spacing out all the brush tips that you are putting down while you are doing a brush stroke. If I increase that spacing, you can see it exactly how it works. So above 100%, there will be even a little gap between the brush tips while I'm drawing. Now, if I reduce that down to 1%, which is the minimum value, then we will get a much smoother brush stroke. So you can see that was 25%, that was above 100%, and this is 1%. The only disadvantage of using a very low spacing value is that it might slow down your computer, because it's quite difficult to process all these little brush tips, especially if you are drawing fast. So if I draw this fast and I use maybe a bigger brush, it might be an issue depending on what type of computer you have. After brush tip shape, the next important control set is the shape dynamics. If I turn this on, we can see all the options here available. So I don't want to go into great detail of this. I just would like to make sure you understand what is shape dynamics used for. So first of all, we can decide what we want to use to control the size of the brush. So, and as you can see, this is the size here. For changing size, we can use to have no control, or fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, or stylus wheel. The last three are something that you need to have a pressure sensitive tablet. Like a Wacom tablet will be able to provide you all these options, but you also need accessories. Like for the stylus wheel, you have to have an airbrush to be able to do that. But let me just show you fade, because this is something that you can even do with a mouse. But before I do anything, I'm going to increase the value of the fade, and I set it to 250. Now, as soon as I set that up, you can see even here in the preview that this is how it will look. So if I start drawing, this option, depending on the amount of fade, will reduce the size of the brush while I'm drawing with it. So it's gradually reducing it to 0 while I'm drawing with it. If I increase this number, let's just say to 2500, I'm going to delete all these and show you once again. So I can start drawing and it disappears. I can also increase this even higher. Let's just set it to 5000. And then I draw again. Now it will be twice as long, but after a while it will disappear. So it's a quite cool feature, and if you, let's just say I set it up to 300, it can be used for lots of things like create similar shaped elements, like for example hair or grass or something like that. This option can be used. If you have a pressure sensitive tablet, then you can set it to pen pressure, and then instead of using a fade value, you can use the pressure on your tablet to change the size of the brush. And you can always add a jitter, which will randomize the setting. So in this case, I'm randomizing the size. That means if I, let's just say, turn off the pen pressure, set the control to off, then if I'm drawing, you can see there's a change in the size. Especially if I make my brush a bit smaller, you can see it more, and I increase the jitter higher up, then it will be visible that it's not constant, but there is always a little bit of jitter in it. And if we increase the size of spacing, then it will be even more obvious. So let me just delete these once again and draw. Now you can see how the jitter works. And if I go back to Shape Dynamics, you can see that we have also a minimum diameter value, which you can raise up or reduce it. And then you have also the same options for the angle of the brush. So you can change how it's controlled and add the jitter to it. You can also change the roundness. And you can also use these all together. So I can add the jitter on all of these values at the same time, and I can even control all of them with the same value, like pen pressure. So I can have everything set up to pen pressure to control. And that's all I wanted to show you about the Shape Dynamics, but all these options are something that is worth practicing and experimenting with. Still staying in the brush panel, let me show you the transfer options. These are very similar to Shape Dynamics, but here you can control opacity, flow, wetness, and mix. So let me show you opacity. First of all, I'm going to set this brush back to normal. So I'm going to clear the brush controls. So it goes back all to normal. And then I turn on only transfer. And here, if I change the control for opacity to pen pressure, then we will get exactly the same thing if we would set this option on or turn this icon on. So I can also change that option from the transfer settings, but I can also set a jitter for the opacity, which will make it more random like this. And separately, I can also change the minimum value of the opacity, or I can also add a jitter to the flow, which will make it even more randomized. Again, I don't want to go into greater detail, because after this point, it's quite obvious how to work with these values. But it's definitely worth trying out all of these options and experiment how they change your brush. The last set of options from the brush panel is the scattering that I would like to show you, which is also a very useful feature. Here you can set up, first of all, the scatter option. Let me just clear my layer to show you how it works. Once it's set up, my brush tips will be actually scattered around, so it won't be lie down on a continuous path, and you can change the amount of scattering, so the distance, how far these elements can go away from the path that you are drawing along. And you can also change the count level, so it will use more dots, a randomized flow of dots. If I increase scattering, you can see how it looks like. And sometimes it can be a little bit time consuming for the computer to process all this. So if you use a high number of scattering and count, you will probably slow down the computer, so it won't be able to follow it continuously, your brush strokes. And you can also add the jitter to the count. And you can also control the jitter and the scatter with the pen pressure, for example, or even these other values as well. So I, for example, set the scatter to around 400% and use a pen pressure to control the scattering. Then this is how it will look like. If I don't press hard, then the brushes will be close to each other, and as soon as I press harder, the scattering will be stronger. Remember, you can always combine all of these sets of options like scattering, shape dynamics, and transfer. You just have to turn all of them on and then set up the way you want to use them. So you can see by using these three options together, I already created a quite interesting, almost like a bokeh effect brush. Once you created a brush and you want to save it, so save all these options for it, you can save a tool preset. Now that is not a brush preset, don't get confused, this is a tool preset. So once you have a brush tip or brush preset and you have all these options in the brush panel set up, that's something you can save as a tool preset. The way you can do that is by clicking on this little arrow here next to the brush icon, and there you can click on this icon here to create a new tool preset, and I can type in bokeh. Let's just call this bokeh brush, and then I can even choose to include the color. In this case, I'm going to turn that off. Click on OK, and then whenever I want to come back to this, it's very easy. I just have to go to the tool presets and select it from there, or I can also use the tool preset panel, which is under window, and choose tool presets, and there whichever tool is always selected, I will get all my tool presets there. So for example, I have a brush which I can use for fur, drawing fur, and just need to select the color for it like this. So it's something I use to draw fur, but then if I switch back to bokeh, I will be able to quickly switch back to the brush that we saved, and I can always change the color quickly and easily, and then use the same brush with the same settings. I only change the color. So that's how to save a tool preset, and in the next video I'm going to show you how to define a brush preset. If you want to create your custom brush tip shape, you can save that as a brush preset. Let me show you how to do that. You just simply need to draw something that you will use as a brush tip. I'm going to use this brush that we created. I just say this is something I would like to save as a brush preset. All I need to do is to use a selection tool like the rectangular marquee tool, make a selection around this part here, and then go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and then call this Test Brush, for example, and I click on OK. And then if I go to the options here in the control bar, at the bottom we will see this new brush listed. So I can start drawing with this. And of course, we can always set up more options for it here in the brush panel. It is also possible to create brushes from images. Now, it's always difficult to decide what part of an image can be used as a brush, but let me just give you an example. Let's just say I would like to make a brush which I can use to create rock formations. For that reason, I'm going to use this part of this image here with these cliffs. But what I need is first of all prepare the image for this, and I'm going to use an adjustment, shadow highlights on this image. I'm going to just increase the amount of the shadows value, increase the highlights a bit, and then I'm going to make a selection. I'm going to use the quick selection tool, quickly draw over this part here. I don't need the background, I just need this rock formation, something like that. I don't need this part either, and then I can put this on a separate layer, pressing Command J or Control J on PC. Now that's on a separate layer. I can use another adjustment. I'm going to use levels, which is Command or Control L, and I'm going to reduce the highlights value and increase the shadows, just to increase the contrast on this a bit. That looks good. So that was before, this is after, and altogether this was before everything. Let me just go back to the previous state. If we go back to file, revert, this is how it looked, and this is how it looks now. So we have this ready, but I have to make a selection based on this layer. By command clicking on the layer's thumbnail, I will have the selection. And I can see actually there's some parts here which I don't need. So in this case, I can press Q and then switch to the brush tool and just select a normal brush for now. And I'm going to just simply draw over these parts, which I don't need for this brush. So I can just draw over this very quickly to amend the selection. Now that I have that, I can go to the edit menu and choose define brush preset. So I click on this and I can call this rocks. Now that we have the brush, we can create a new layer. I'm just going to create an empty new layer, fill it in with white. Let's test our brush. So that's how it looks. I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. It's interesting, but it won't be enough to be able to use it properly. So remember, you always can use the brush panel to make your brushes work better. So I'm going to add a bit of angle jitter, and I'm going to also add the size jitter. So randomly change the size and also the angle. I can also click on flip X and flip Y jitter. And now if I start using the brush, it's a bit more interesting to work with. So it automatically rotates every time. And I can even draw like this, but then it becomes very dark in the middle and it will be only interesting along the edges. But if I'm a little bit more patient, I can actually build interesting rock formations by adjusting or aligning the brush whenever I create a new point in it. So something like that. You can already see that we can create an interesting shape just using the same selection but adding it several times to our rock formation. And you can always add more parts to specific areas where you want to fill in holes. I can make your brush smaller or bigger on the way. And even though there's a jitter on the size, you can always add custom changes. Last but not least, I would like to show you how can you export and import brushes. The best and easiest way is to go to the Edit, Presets, Preset Manager option. And here you can see your brushes. And you can easily select any of them, delete them, or you can save them as a set. So save set will create a brush file for you, which you can easily transfer to other computers. And once you double click on that file, it will load those brushes into Photoshop automatically. So that's how easy it is to export and import brushes in Photoshop.